I was 22 when they sent us into the Hindu Kush, and even now, with my hair gone silver and my hands shaking over a kitchen table half a world away, I still smell that place when the nights turn cold. People talk about mountains like they are noble, beautiful, eternal things, but those peaks were not beautiful to us. They were teeth. Black, broken teeth sawing at a dead sky. We had been inserted under cover of darkness with orders so vague they sounded like a joke played by exhausted men in command tents. Recon a lost outpost, recover any survivors, destroy sensitive material, report unusual activity. Unusual activity. That was how they dressed madness in military language. We were 12 soldiers moving in a line through a pass so narrow it felt like walking down a throat. The moon was pale and thin, snagged on the ridges like torn cloth. Nobody joked. Nobody smoked. Even our gear seemed quieter than it should have been, as if the mountain itself were listening. Then we saw the outpost lights burning ahead in perfect stillness, though the place had been dark on the last flyover, and I remember Sergeant Lyle whispering, with no humor in him at all, "Boys, whatever's up there has been waiting for us." At first glance the outpost looked untouched, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. In a war zone, silence is one thing, order is another. Sandbags were neatly stacked. Antennae still rose from the roof like insect feelers. The perimeter wire had not been cut or trampled. But when we stepped through the gate, there were no footprints in the snow except our own, though the generators were running and yellow light leaked from the barracks windows. It was like arriving at a dinner where the host had gone missing only seconds before the guests sat down. We cleared building by building. Mess hall empty, food rotting in trays but still laid out. Command shack empty, maps pinned to boards, radios hissing to themselves in broken bursts. Latrine empty. Armory untouched. Then we found the first man in the chapel room they had improvised from a storage shed. He was kneeling with his forehead to the floor, hands clasped, body rigid as wood. For one blessed second I thought he was alive and praying. Then I touched his shoulder, and the whole top half of him tipped sideways in one hard piece. Frozen. Dead. His lips had been peeled back into a grin so wide the skin split at both corners. In the lantern light his teeth gleamed wetly, and on the wall above him someone had written in charcoal, over and over, in English, "IT came in with the wind. We should have withdrawn right then." I know that now. But soldiers are trained to solve, contain, report. Fear gets folded into procedure until procedure becomes its own kind of blindness. Captain Rayner ordered us to lock down the compound and continue the search. He said maybe the men had suffered some kind of chemical exposure or psychotic break. Maybe insurgents were using local folklore to scare us off. He kept talking in that clipped, educated voice, and I think he needed to hear himself more than we needed to hear him. We found 7 more bodies before dawn. None of them showed battle wounds. No gunshots. No stabbings. No signs of a firefight. But each body had been arranged. One soldier tucked into bed with his boots polished and his hands crossed like a child laid out for burial. Another standing in the radio room with the headset melted into the flesh of his ears. 2 more in the communications trench, their faces turned upward, eyes removed, mouths packed with gravel. We located one surviving man at last in the old munitions bunker below the compound. Private First Class Haskins. He was alive but only in the technical sense. He sat naked in the dark, rocking, his skin blue with cold, whispering to someone who was not there. When we wrapped him in a blanket, he bit through his own tongue and laughed while blood poured down his chin. I had never heard a human laugh that way. It sounded like an animal learning speech from something buried underground. By midday the weather closed around us. The radio failed first, then the backup set, and then the generator began coughing as if the fuel itself had gone bad. Snow came down in thick, strange curtains, each flake large and soft as ash from a funeral pyre. Haskins would not let us touch him for long. Every time a medic tried, he started speaking in voices that did not belong to him. Not one voice. Many. Old men, children, women, men with accents from places he had never been. They overlapped inside his throat like a roomful of strangers all trying to confess through one mouth. He knew things too. He called us by childhood nicknames we had never shared. He repeated secrets no one in that outpost could have known. He looked at Sergeant Lyle and described the exact barn where Lyle's brother hanged himself in Missouri, down to the red paint blistering off the door in summer heat. Lyle stumbled backward like he had been shot. Then Haskins turned his eyes on me. They had gone pale, almost silver, like frost on tin. He told me my mother had whispered that she wished I had died instead of my sister when the fever came, and the worst thing was not that he said it. The worst thing was that it was true. She had said it only once, thinking I was asleep. Hearing it again in that freezing bunker, from a grinning private with blood on his teeth, felt like having my skull pried open. That was when I stopped believing we were dealing with a man who had snapped. That evening the first of us changed. Not all at once, not with any movie theatrics, but gradually, like rot blooming under wallpaper. It was Rios, our radio operator, quiet kid from El Paso who always carried pictures of his daughters tucked behind his dog tags. He complained of a draft, though we were all cold. Then he said he could hear singing outside the wire. We told him to shut up. An hour later he was still listening, head tilted, smiling faintly as though someone he loved stood just beyond the storm calling him home. I was on watch with him when he asked me, very politely, whether I could see the women in the snow. I saw nothing but wind and white darkness. He kept describing them anyway, bare feet, black hair, eyes sewn shut, moving without sinking into the drifts. Then his nose began to bleed. He did not react. The blood ran over his lips and onto his chin while he watched the blizzard like a man watching a parade. I reached for him and he turned so fast I flinched. His expression was not angry. It was pitying. "Don't be afraid," he told me in a voice so deep it rattled in his chest. "It only wears the dead so the living will listen." Then he put the barrel of his rifle under his own jaw. I lunged, Sergeant Lyle lunged, and the shot blew upward through the roof of his mouth, yet somehow he stayed standing for a second afterward, twitching as a dark paste sprayed the wall. When he fell, the singing outside rose louder and every man in that room heard it. The captain still wanted discipline, still wanted order, and that may be the cruelest thing memory has preserved about him. He assembled us in the mess hall and spoke over the storm, over Haskins' muffled muttering from the bunker, over the sound of one of the doors tapping in the wind like a fingernail against a coffin lid. He said we were exhausted, isolated, under psychological pressure. He said the enemy used superstition. He said evil was a word for men who stopped thinking. Then the cook stove, cold for hours, clanged from the inside. Once, twice, 3 times. Nobody moved. Captain Rayner walked to it with the forced calm of a man who refuses to notice his own fear. He opened the iron hatch, and a smell came out so foul that we all gagged at once. Sewage, wet fur, burned marrow, something sweet beneath it like flowers left too long on a grave. The captain shone his flashlight inside. For 1 second his face remained merely puzzled. Then everything in him broke. He began screaming, not like an officer, not like a soldier, but like a child seeing fire crawl under a bedroom door. He staggered backward, clawing at his eyes, and before anyone could stop him he drew his sidearm and emptied it into the ceiling, the walls, the hanging pots, anything except the stove. When the slide locked back, he sank to his knees and sobbed that the thing inside had his wife's face, only opened wrong like a lamb split for roasting. We never found anything in that stove. Only cold ash. But after that, command died with him. We tried prayer because men try anything when reason begins to rot. Not all of us were believers, but faith is less about certainty than desperation when the dark becomes personal. Lyle had been raised Baptist, O'Donnell was Catholic. I barely believed in anything except the rifle in my hands, but we gathered in that little chapel shed anyway beside the frozen dead man and the charcoal warning on the wall. O'Donnell started with the Lord's Prayer. Halfway through the wind stopped. Not lessened. Stopped. The silence that followed felt engineered, like something leaning close to hear better. Then Haskins began shrieking from the bunker below us, and his voice came through the floorboards as if the boards themselves had grown a throat. He cursed us in Latin first, then in some language I still do not know, sharp and wet and full of choking consonants. The chapel walls started knocking from the outside. Soft at first. Then harder. Then all at once from every side, roof included, as though dozens of hands were testing for weakness. Someone cried out. Someone else fired through the door without orders. The knocking ceased, and for a heartbeat I thought maybe bullets had solved what prayers had not. Then a child's voice answered from directly above my head, from the rafters no child could have reached. It asked me why I had left my sister alone that night with the fever. I do not remember dropping my rifle. I only remember falling to my knees and realizing the thing did not merely want our bodies. It wanted our guilt. After that, the siege became intimate. It was no longer the compound under attack. It was each man's soul peeled open and worked on separately. O'Donnell saw his dead father sitting in the barracks doorway, smoking and grinning through black gums. Mendez heard his son calling from the supply shed and almost walked into the storm before we tackled him. Sergeant Lyle stopped speaking entirely after sunset, only staring at corners as if something stood there just outside my sight. The snow around the outpost changed too. It no longer reflected light correctly. It seemed to drink it. Shadows stretched the wrong way. Once, crossing from the command shack to the bunker, I looked down and saw footprints appear beside mine in the fresh snow, forming as I watched, step for step, as though an invisible companion walked with me. Inside the bunker, Haskins had swollen grotesquely, his joints puffed, veins standing out in ropes beneath his skin. But his eyes were clear for the first time. He grabbed my sleeve and whispered in his own young voice, "Don't let it make you remember." Before I could answer, his spine arched with a crack like green wood snapping in a fire. His mouth opened impossibly wide. Something moved under the skin of his throat, pushing outward from within, not like a tongue, not like any organ God ever intended, but like a hand trying to be born through the wrong flesh. I shot him twice in the chest out of pure terror. He kept smiling through the holes. It ended, if that word means anything, near dawn on the third day. By then we were 5 men left from 12 and none of us were whole. Captain Rayner had locked himself in the armory and blown his head apart. O'Donnell wandered into the storm following a hymn only he could hear. Mendes slashed his own palms open and painted symbols across the barracks before vanishing from his cot without opening the door. The mountain had taken them, or the thing inside the mountain had. Lyle finally spoke just before sunrise. He said the old villagers we had ignored on the way and had been trying to warn us. There was no lost outpost, he said. Not really. The place had been abandoned years before after Soviet troops disappeared there. The mission itself, the coordinates, the urgency, someone had wanted bodies brought back into that hollow place, fresh minds for an old hunger. He looked older than any man I had known. Then he told me fire was the only language left. We stacked fuel in every building, every room, every trench we could reach. Haskins, still somehow breathing in the bunker, laughed and begged us not to waste the house it had made for itself. We ignored him. When the flames caught, they moved too fast, running along walls and beams like something eager at last to show its true shape. The fire turned strange colors, blue, green, then a red so dark it looked black. And from inside the burning compound came voices. Not screams. Voices. Hundreds of them, muttering, pleading, chanting, rejoicing. Lyle held the detonator for the munitions bunker until the last possible second, and when he pressed it, the mountain answered with a roar so deep I felt it in my teeth. I was the only one found. Search teams recovered me 3 days later, half buried in a snow trench 2 miles down the pass with no gloves, no helmet, and no memory of how I had escaped the blast. They told me the outpost had been obliterated by secondary explosions and avalanche damage. They said there was nothing left to investigate. That was the official line. But sometimes official lines are just boards nailed over cellar doors. I know what followed me down from those mountains because it never fully left. It comes in dreams first. The wind speaking with human tongues, the smell from the stove, Haskins' jaw bending wider than bone should allow. Then it comes into waking life in smaller ways. Mirrors misting from the inside. Frost forming words on windows. Songs heard in empty rooms. My wife left years ago because I would wake up screaming in languages neither of us knew, clutching at my chest as if fingers were moving beneath the ribs. Doctors called it trauma. Priests called it oppression. I do not argue with either. I only know that every winter, on one night near the anniversary, the house grows very still, and the old mountain silence settles into the corners. Then if I am unlucky, I hear boots pacing outside in fresh snow even when the ground is bare. 12 sets. Sometimes 11. And once, only once, I heard a 12th pair stop at my door while a voice I had not heard since 1991 whispered, warm and cheerful through the wood, "We held the line for you, soldier. Now open up."